Hi there, everybody. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret and you're on Booktube. Today we're going to be going over my recommendations for People April. So this is going to be a more booktubey video, whereas normally my live streams are 75% booktube, 25% authortube. So this is on the booktube side. We're going to be talking about a readathon in April called People April. It is hosted by Elisabeth at Bouquins Books and Roz at Scallydandling about the books. So I've got the links to their announcements. I will pop in the chat as I say hello and people trickle in. So Elisabeth, and I just said annonce instead of announcement because it's shorter. And Roz, push that out there. If you're not acquainted, People April is just sort of a refinement on the concept of Nonfiction November, where nonfiction is so broad that Elisabeth was like, but I have all these books about people that I want to read. So she thought she'd narrow it down and make April a special month for reading about people. It could be memoir, biography, group memoir, group biography, autobiography, what was the creative memoir that's like you don't know if it's fiction or nonfiction. Lots of interesting possibilities, and of course we encourage people to read from their shelf. So look around, see what you have that is in that genre, and maybe you can join us for People April. So yes, it is the end of March, which means that's why I'm looking forward to April and getting ready by giving you these recommendations for the April readathons that I'll be reading for. But the other thing I do at the end of the month is remind people that if you want to get a jump on April Patreon benefits, you can do that now before April starts. So I've got two core benefits. One is bookish mail, where I send you a postcard, and one is a book club. And we have a read for April. It is Our History is the Future, which is looking back at some history of Indigenous resistance, specifically how it sort of grew into the Dakota Access Pipeline resistance. And so I thought that'd be really interesting. So if you want to join us, head on over to that link down in the description. So back to the readathon. We have two quotes as guides. They're doing very loose prompts, right? No like specific prompts or boards or anything like that. They just have two quotes that basically it's like the association game. Maybe these will make you think of a specific person, and then you've got a book to read. So let's see what they are. Biography should be written by an acute enemy, attributed to Arthur Balfour. And Elisabeth goes into sort of the backstory of Arthur Balfour and like some resonance he has for her today. And the other quote is, I never travel without my diary. One should always have something to read on the train. That is attributed to Oscar Wilde. And so she had some travel recommendations for sure. So I will not be exactly using those, but I am doing a current read of one of those. So we'll dive into first half recommendations, what I'm currently reading, second half of recommendations, and then what I intend to read for People April. So there we go. I'm going to say hello to the chat. Hello, hello, Barrett Lori. YouTube likes its back scratched. So please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Oh, that's fantastic. You're reminding me to do this. Thank you, Barrett. Barrett just had a vlog out today. Not only does it feature the one, the only, the glamorous Briley, the British Bulldog, but it also has a very important topic about health and the news and famous people and normalizing what we should do and how we should treat things like just happened in the British royal press. So that is definitely to be seen. Also, chat if you're comfortable, as that also counts as a back scratch for the old YouTube. You're so fun, Barrett. Thank you, thank you. And Elisabeth is here, co-host of the Readathon. Yay! Barrett's a Patreon. And you know, we're not having the karaoke for March, but we will have it in April. And he usually has it just in time to display his fun postcard, which is always like precious. It's lovely for me to see. Yeah. And can't commit to the book club because I'm commitment phobic. That's okay. That's okay. You've got the commitments in the right places. That's what counts, I think. Sorry, I wasn't fishing. Very cute. Leslie is here. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to anyone around the globe. Let's dive into some of our first recommendations, shall we? So, part one. What's cool about this is that I planned, you will know, I am in San Luis Obispo right now. I am not in my home in Portland. So I had to bring these books down to be able to show them on screen. So I planned to talk about this one, and I just saw it on Berna's, I think it was her People April TBR. Ta-da! Except she's going to read it in Turkish, and I, of course, read it translated. So it's a graphic memoir called Dare to Disappoint Growing Up in Turkey by Özge Samancı. And beautiful art, like illustrations, really cool, and also really touching. So basically, Dare to Disappoint is about someone who has certain societal expectations and family expectations and really struggles to break out of that mold and go her own way and fail on her own and like find her niche in life. And so I just thought this was really well told and something that can be very confusing and, you know, back and forth and not very narratively easy to share. I thought she did a great job in this format. So not only is it a graphic memoir, it's also People April pick. So that was mine, and Berna is going to read it, so you'll also hear from her. Berna's Bookish Adventures. So that's lovely. Oh, and I did some extra work this morning, which was pointing out where I have reviewed them before. So I have buy links in the description, but I also have review links to share. I don't know if YouTube will let me put 2 links in one comment, but there it is. We'll see. Dare to Disappoint. My next recommendation is across Europe on the other side. It's called Sixpence House, Lost in a Town of Books by Paul Collins. And I picked this up used. It is a book about someone who runs away to run a bookshop. And it's in a most famous bookshop town, Hay-on-Wye in Wales. And of course, that is one I considered visiting on my trip, but it was not long enough to include. But basically, it's his family's adjustment. Kind of like if you did study abroad and you were in a new culture and, you know, like new expectations and you made new routines for yourself and discovered things about yourself, good or bad. This is basically his journey through being a bookshop owner. And what's interesting for me about this is that Paul Collins is now currently a professor, English probably, in Portland, Oregon. I noticed when I looked him up and tried to see what he was doing now. So this book is fairly old. I think it's like maybe 10. Publishers will tell me 2003. So like 20 years old. So, you know, people have multiple lives, and this is his experience traveling and recording about it. So neat. Let me check in. Lovely. And Elisabeth says, bringing books just for the video. That's organization. Yes. And it's something that I could only do because I was driving, because obviously I can't cart all these on a plane. So level of organization I aspire to, but will likely never hit. I don't know. Your road trips look like very put together. And you've got all these people and animals to look after. So I don't know. Yes, graphic memoirs totally count for People April, and this one looks beautiful. Oh, Jim is also here. He says, I used to visit Hay-on-Wye regularly when I lived in Worcester. I think that's how you pronounce it. Let me know. I just learned this week that it's actually pronounced Cirencester. I thought there was a shortening of it, but I think that's actually correct. And I'm like, who on earth thinks of a name like that? It's so bizarre. Anyway, number 3. Number 3 is an Indigenous read. It is A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Elisabeth. 2 L's, 2 T's. So this is a memoir. Let's see. They say it better than I can. So the Mohawk phrase for depression can be roughly translated to a mind spread out on the ground. Ta-da. Alicia Elliott explores how apt a description that is for the ongoing effects of personal, intergenerational, and colonial traumas she and so many Native people have experienced. A national bestseller in Canada. This is an updated and expanded American edition. So here's the thing. There's another book called Heartberries by Therese Mailhot, which is very famous, I think, in the genre. And I read that as well, but didn't connect with it as well. So you're gonna have to read widely to find like what keys you into a certain experience. And for me, this one is much better tuned because she has several different essays and she sort of connects them to national issues based on how she has experienced episodes of these things. And I found that really helpful to understand what she was trying to explain. Whereas the Mailhot book is more about addiction and things that I can't readily relate to. And so it's more personal and less globalized. So if you're looking for something like me and you don't have that bridge to relate to the Mailhot themes, I would really suggest this. And she has a new book out and I haven't read it yet, but some of my friends have, and like that should be on my TBR. So there we go. Ooh, 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 ooh. I've got one more in the first group and then we'll have a little break. So this is an oldie but a goodie. I mean, Sixpence House I didn't read till a few years ago, but it's an oldie. This one I read a long time ago and it's still got a place on my favorites shelf. So this is called Without Reservations by Alice Steinbach. And I read this back when I thought I would be a travel writer, which is like several years ago, as Barrett might say. So Alice Steinbach is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. And after she retired, I think she either divorced or her husband died and she was on her own, and very capable, older, retired woman. But she started to realize that she defined herself in the ways that she related to other people rather than what she was at her core, at her essence. And so she sort of put together this program, kind of like Eat, Pray, Love, but less in the clouds, let's say, and more realistic, but also still with charm and whimsy. Of course, I love this book, so it's got to have some charm and whimsy. And so the pieces that she puts together for this trip to sort of reflect on her own essence are going to Paris. I mean, obviously, I'm going to connect to that. Paris, where she finds a soulmate. Oxford, where she takes a course on the English village. Milan, where she befriends a young woman about to be married. So you get lots of interesting things going on outside her, as well as her interesting reflections on how she's reinterpreting her role in the world. And I just loved it. You would think like a 22, 23-year-old reading this, connecting with someone who's like 55 is a bit odd. But you know, if you're at either of those points or anywhere in between, I think you could really get a lot from this book. And so Alice Steinbach, unfortunately, she passed away, but she was from, I think, around the Baltimore area, and I lived right near her, and I never knew it. So I don't want you to miss out. So that's my last recommendation for the first group. And then I was going to recommend, let's see, I have my review videos, so I'll pop those in the chat in case you want to check out what I said specifically about the books when I read them. For one of them, and there's the last one that I have. Okay. So, current people read. Oh, right. Okay. So what I was going to do at the break was not only remind you to like the stream, subscribe to the channel, but also, what am I currently reading for the Irish Readathon that also works for Elisabeth's travel theme of People April? It's Full Tilt. It's Full Tilt, and then the subtitle is covered. Let's see. Ireland to India with a bicycle. So basically, it's about 200 pages, and I'm at 155. So I'm taking the whole month to read this. But it like starts in continental Europe in the West, and then she immediately zooms through, like bicycling, um, starting at the beginning of the year, and then she spends a lot of time in Persia, as it's known, in 1964, whenever she's cycling, and then Afghanistan, and then now she's in Pakistan, and hoping to get to India. So she's almost at the end. I think at the Persia parts, she's commenting on not only the daily trials and exaltations of bicycling through a beautiful countryside, if you can see that, but also cultural commentary. She's talking about the politics of the day, which is kind of jarring because you're like, oh, different states existed then, and like the nuclear testing or the AID projects. It's just like another world, truly. So very interesting. Not feeling very Irish. Every once in a while, she'll say, "Oh, it looks just like the hills back home," or "Oh, they knit sweaters that are exactly in the Aran Island pattern," and you're like, "What?" So, but it is very People April because she's quite funny, and her observations are pretty interesting. So, it's not fully baked, but it is full tilt. So that is my current read that might be a recommendation. Let's see. Let's catch up here. Woo, I have a lot of stuff that I missed. Okay. Hey, Adlai. Hey, Jim. Worcester. There we go. I think I got it. We have a Tammy Renee Crochet. Hello, hello, and welcome. We're talking about April Readathon. People April. Barrett, I think, has the Alicia Elliott on his TBR. Excellent. Definitely recommend it. Jim says the Cesters are Roman towns. Cirencester, Leicester, Gloucester, Worcester. So the only one that doesn't obey the pattern is Cirencester. So that's what I have an issue with. Yes, Leslie has read the memoir. I can't remember what it's called. I think it has like stars on the front, and she says it's so good. So yeah. The suffix "cester" is the Old English word "ceaster," meaning fortification, and is a borrowing from the Latin word "castrum." Interesting. That sounds like something else. Okay, I'd better get this one too. I don't know which one you're referring to. If it's without reservations, it might be hard to find. We'll see. Worcester, pronounced Worcester, Worcester. Not sure about Worcester, Mass. Yeah, it's pronounced Worcester, Mass, I think. They learned. The usual outcome of these streams, adding to the TBR. Yes, excellent. Very interesting. We love the word history that Jim is bringing. Much appreciated. It's a fun concept. The bicycling, yes, not for me. I don't know how she does it. I don't see pictures of her. There's no pictures in it. So you're like, how does she go 70 miles, 100 miles in a day? When she's going through like the desert before the Himalayas, she's talking about how hot it is and how it's like 114 and how she's had like 3/4 of a pound of salt in the past 3 days, but she's still faint and sleeping 3 hours at the midday. It's pretty crazy. It's like an extreme sports thing, which is not my thing, obviously. But yeah. And I just went to a little free library yesterday, the day before, and they had a Dervla Murphy book in it, which was not this one. And was it Yugoslavia? I can't remember. It didn't ring a bell. It was an A something title. So yeah. Jim says I read Dervla Murphy's cycling trip through Yugoslavia after the conflict. You read it after the conflict, or her cycling trip was after the conflict? I imagine the former, because if she's 30 in 1960, the conflict was in 1990s. That math doesn't math too well for cycling many miles a day. Hi, Richard. I came into Margaret mispronouncing British place names. What? I thought I got everything clear. Oh, yes, that is not the one I found in the little free library. So this is another Dervla Murphy title, eligible for Irish Readathon. We've still got a week for it. Through the Embers of Chaos, Balkan Journeys by Dervla Murphy. Thank you, Jim. Very cool. Okay, so that's the current read. Here are 4 more recommendations. for people, April. And 1 is going to be physical, and then 3 are going to be overlays because I don't have physical copies of them. So this one, if you can see the beautiful gray cover, you know it's a Persephone title that's coming. And if you can scooch up close to the screen, Few Eggs and No Oranges, The Diaries of Vera Hodgson, 1940 to 1945. And it is quite the book. So 5 years of personal diaries, and she's a pretty consistent correspondent. That gives you some idea. They always do really nice end papers for each book. But I recommend this one in several cases because I've read a few diaries lately. I'm reading Greville's memoirs right now, which are like turn of the 19th century, and I'm on 1842, I think. He's an interesting correspondent, but that is more social gossip that's formal. This is more daily jottings down, casual observations, and occasional deep plumbing of depths. So like here's an excerpt I thought you might like. So this is February 1944. Of course, she's in London. She's volunteering at, I think, a religious organization. I'm not really sure on that part, but she stays in the city, and she's got family outside the city as well. And of course, there's all the rationing and the bombing, and so it's very hard. She says, the authorities have chosen to place a pig bin, capitalized, outside our house in Brum meaning Birmingham, to Mother's great annoyance. The milk horse comes along, lifts the lid, and noses about to see if there is bread inside. He eats it and rolls the lid onto the road. He moves on. Then the local cats stroll up and leap into the bin to see what they can find, scatter the contents in a large circle, and retire. You can imagine the charming scene round our front gate. It never occurs to the authorities to bring 2 or 3 bins, capitalized, for the overflowing contents of one, and the lids would remain securely on. Mother is on the warpath and is going to write to the corporation about the conduct of the horse and the cats and the bins. So some of it is charming and whimsical, as you would expect, I would appreciate. And, occasionally is what you get this is oppressive, and I don't know if someone is alive or it was really hard to take this whole building disappearing this week and that kind of thing. But mostly it's like little jibes and, oh, we got this today and we got unexpected oranges, like just simple pleasures. So I read this, I think, over 2 months last year and just like dipped in and out, and I just really enjoyed it. So it might be really good for people looking to time travel a little bit, sample a different historical period, get to know London, because she talks a lot about London and the places, and you could always look it up on your map, and that'd be really fun. And yeah, so that's a really good recommendation. And then we go to our overlays. If you've got questions, definitely pop them in the chat. So I'm catching up here, making sure I don't forget the things. I've got a few eggs and no oranges. That in the comments. Oh, okay. So catching up on Jim's recommendation here. Dervla Murphy's cycling trip was after the conflict. She was in her early 60s and still cycling. That is a boss bitch. Wow. That sounds even more interesting to me now. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, Tammy Esposito. Hello. Maybe you had like a different account that you switched from. Just deleted that. Weird. Okay. Oh my gosh, Dervla died last year at the age of 90. Wow. So she was out and about in the 60s and she only died last year. That's a long and very exciting, adventure-filled life, it seems like. Very cool. Okay, so my next recommendation, I think, will be Fox and I. And my review, it's actually a recommendation video where I found it, is here. So you may recognize this because I've mentioned it and definitely recommended it a couple times. This is Fox and I by Catherine Raven, and you can see the little fox on the cover. It's very interesting because I think Catherine Raven, she was on A Mighty Blaze, and I got to produce the interview. I think she's coming at this from an angle of like a very difficult past and wanting to be alone and not connecting with people and possibly being neurodivergent in that antisocialness. So she's out in Montana, she's built her own cottage, she basically interacts with humans just as much as she has to earn money to live and get supplies. And she's a biologist and like a field researcher. So this is right up her alley. She has a fox who starts to visit her on her plot of land. And then she starts observing him and interacting with him and just thinking about how foxes think and how people think. And like there's this interesting interplay. So she catalogs this while also reflecting on how the relationship has changed her. You get a little bit of her life, you get a little bit of grander philosophy about humans and animals, even though humans are animals. And I just thought it was really beautiful. It was kind of in the vein of people who talk about what it makes me think of, because the same person recommended it, is Wintering by Elisabeth May, and that's about like giving yourself rest, giving yourself time if you're in depression, and sort of like allowing yourself space to process things. And I feel like this is another way of doing that, is like connecting with wildlife and intensely observing something minutely and reflecting on it and processing it, because that sort of helps your own internal processes. I don't know. I really enjoyed listening to this. So that is why I can say we love Libro.fm, your best local stop for independent audiobooks. Just gotta plug that in there. Two more recommendations. We've got one that Elisabeth talked about, so I'm gonna pop that one up. I finished this, I think, a couple months ago. It's called Permanent Astonishment, a memoir by Thompson Highway. And when I looked on Bookshop to find links to buy this book, he has a bunch of other books out. So this is his first memoir, I believe, but he has a bunch of other plays. And of course, he's a Canadian writer and an Indigenous writer, and so not someone I think that me on the West Coast in a major city would have necessarily heard of. And so the fact that Libro.fm brought this to my attention is very gratitude inducing. So I really appreciated that. Permanent Astonishment is about his childhood as like first 5 years maybe are spent traveling around northern Saskatchewan and Manitoba. There's a border that doesn't really exist for the Indigenous tribes there because they cross over it all the time, in the Arctic. And how they survive is an Indigenous way of living. So they have their sleds, they have their dogs, they camp on little islands because there's, protection from wolves and whatever else that can't swim across. And so you get to hear a lot about his, I think Elisabeth called it nostalgic. And there's some nostalgia, there's a lot of respect, there's a lot of love. He just loves his family and thinks their accomplishments are really worth celebrating. So he talks about the individual, his dad's history, his mom's history, how they linked to the people in their village. And then we get the flight to the residential school. And while it does contain some traumatic events, he passes over them very lightly, and it's not really about those because he doesn't want to give airtime to them, he says. And so really it's about learning English and getting along with his classmates, which he didn't really because he's a two-spirit individual. So I'm saying he, but they in the book he sort of, again, passes over it lightly and doesn't make a big issue out of it. Everyone sort of assumes he's a boy, but he has feelings of like, I want to do this girly thing, I want to do this other thing, and why are you sort of painting me into this box? And so some people understand it and some people don't. And in a Catholic school in Canada, obviously there were some limitations in the 1950s or 60s where he was. So a lot of that sort of childhood development is the theme, and like the growth and the understanding and the moments of joy. So I usually flag when I come across a book that has the title mentioned, and I go, oh, the title. But he does it several times, and I was like, oh, that's kind of the point, is that it's permanent astonishment at all these beautiful things in creation and all these things to celebrate in his long life. And so it's very uplifting, I would say. So great book. And then the final book for people, April, to recommend is another recent read. It's called, someone just went to the litter box, sorry if you heard any of that, Self-Portrait in Black and White by Thomas Chatterton Williams. And this was a really fascinating book. And here I'm sort of on the cusp of, it's definitely not my rodeo. Like, I can't speak on many of these issues, but Thomas Chatterton Williams invites everyone in to think about the issues that he raises. So I have a review up for this one and about the specific points that I talked about. So I don't want to like go over them all, but I'll share a couple quotes with you guys just to entice and intrigue. I've got my Storygraph review open. So basically, he volunteered for Get Out the Vote for Obama. And when he was in Baltimore, that's where he really was sort of woken up to the fact that race differences and class differences are so closely aligned in this milieu, at least. And so one of the quotes I pulled was, "Do I really need to pretend that we are all united, socially indistinguishable, in order not to deny my African ancestry, to honor the experiences of my father's family?" So because he's from upper class background, he visits this very poor, lower class neighborhood and talks to Black people with whom he feels he has not much in common, not easy to understand where they're coming from when he's talking about Obama. And he's just having this beginning of his awakening of like, well, what does race really mean? How do I relate as a biracial man and all this kind of stuff? And then later, he likens his grappling with this issue of identity for him and larger society to the search for security and identity for secular Jewish people. So he says, "I struggle to slough off the feeling that I've arrived at an existential bind, in many ways similar to one that grips secular Jews. The purpose of all these generations of struggle has always been the freedom to choose and create the self with dignity. But it is precisely this coveted self-regard and autonomy that threatens now to annihilate the very racial identity that won it in the first place." So he's sort of saying, well, if my ancestors have fought for the Black race, in quotes, to have equality, to have freedom of expression, here I am, and I want to do things that are not considered Black enough by some people in my life and are criticized. So how do I have that autonomy that they wanted me to have without dishonoring or, forgetting the racial separateness is what got me here. And so he sort of plays both sides, sort of asks philosophical questions. And normally I am not a philosophical question listener, but this one, he just wrote it in a way that really spoke to me. So maybe it was just because it's like my 17th book on thinking about race, and I hit the magic number where things are starting to unlock in my head. He does raise a lot of points that are about white people thinking about race as well, because I think one of the major results of inequality in America is that Black people are considered racialized, whereas white people are the norm and not therefore racialized. And so breaking that up and thinking, well, what does it mean to be white? Like, what are those privileges? What are those baggages? Sort of thinking like both sides have different things. It's not just one is straight and narrow and one is like the traumatic history. So how do we both work to get to a better place? Because it's not great right now. So that is the last recommendation. Did I share link? I did. Okay. So yeah. And I hope this gives like a sort of diverse array, because what I've got are some on nature, some with history, some with like different backgrounds and diverse viewpoints. I got one about books, and I got one from Turkey where I've lived. So I was really trying to get a good sampling. I mean, I have lots of books I've read about people and memoir, and lots of really good ones. But I think that, yeah, I was just trying to get a good sample for you guys. So now I'm on to my sort of pile of possibilities, but really it's sort of like a managed TBR. So here's what I think about that. I've got two potentials. Sorry, someone's going crazy. I did not even give him catnip this morning, but he's like rushing around. Yes, a lot of life to cover there with Dermot Murphy's journeys, and Permanent Astonishment sounds intriguing. Yes, very, very good and uplifting, as I said. So my two for upcoming April reads. This one I've had forever, and it's just sitting on my shelf, and I need to go through it. It's called Food Heroes, 16 Culinary Artisans Preserving Tradition by Georgia Pellegrini. And it's basically like if you are in the slow food movement, which Pellegrini, I believe, started or coined the term, it's people who are doing something to contribute to that, whether through farming practices or advocacy or community participation or organization. And it's right up my alley, right? So I don't know why I haven't read it. It's probably because it's lots of small stories rather than one novel. But yeah, I really want to read this. This also works for Climathon, so I think I'll be using this as a double dip. Climathon is year-long as a readathon, and People April, of course, is just April. But there's another Climathon read, which may work. Well, actually, this one I'm not sure. I think it will, but we'll see. So, essays by Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry is someone who I definitely have heard of many times, but haven't read specifically. So, what are people for? People is in the title. That's why I thought this might work. But it's a lot of his more well-known essays, which of course I haven't encountered before because it was before my time. But I believe my impressions of Wendell Berry are that he's a nature writer and a conservationist, and I sort of get him mixed up with Barry Lopez maybe. But yeah, what are people for me sort of encapsulates the frustration of people who are like, this is the better road. Why aren't we taking it? What is holding you up? You know, like just frustration with humanity, which I may be in the mood for this April. What do you think? So I'm excited to see what that really is. And it may apply, it may not. It may work for Climathon or People April or both or one or neither. Who knows? So that is on my short TBR. And so that's why I brought these two down. And I think everything else is going to be research reads and mood reading, because, or maybe I'll see more TBRs for People April and that will inspire me, because yeah, research reads and Climathon and People April, main priorities, because I'm going to be editing. Speaking of editing, our next live stream on the channel will be for research and whip updates. So I did not grab the link for it, but it is up on my channel. So if you want to come back for the regularly scheduled Wednesday live, that's 12 p.m. Pacific time, daylight time, I'll be going live with the last part in my bag here, which is stuff that I brought back from the trip that is, you know, sort of People April related. It's about a lot of like history. I got these like lovely little brochures that you can only get in local museums. And yeah, like gold, right? And they're like 50p. So really easy to pick up a lot of interesting local stories and sort of pass those into fiction. So very excited about Wednesday's live, where I'll be updating you on the research trip and the two major points that were of interest, which was Saltcoats, where I went to the North Ayrshire Heritage Centre, and Glasgow, where I went to the Mitchell Library and the Glasgow City Archives. And it was very exactly timed. I will explain how all that happened, but yes. So that is us for today. I hope like some of these books make it onto your TBR. If not for People April, maybe Nonfiction November because they will work, or at any other time of the year is also okay. I will be working on editing and researching. So that is my task here. I will also be working on taxes for this week, both mine and the ones for the rentals that I'm taking over managing. So wish me luck. That is going to be quite the undertaking to do in a week. But on the way, I'll be back here Wednesday at noon Pacific to update you on my research. Other than that, I hope you're having a great time reading Irish readathon books, and let me know what you're excited for in April in the comments. That is all for today, and have a beautiful day or night. Bye, everybody.